Right, Neta, we're live. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more. Let's kick it off with what you're doing. So you founded this awesome company. You moved from U.S., California, to Israel and Tel Aviv. Parametrix. Not only is it a great company, it's got a kick-ass name. Let me ask about the name first. So Parametrix Insurance. What does the name represent to you, or where does it come from?
So it actually has a lot of meaning behind it. It's based on a parametric with a C, not with an X, insurance, which is an insurance model that essentially eliminates the claims process. So when we set out to, really create a new futuristic insurance product, one of the biggest things that we noticed was that the claims process just puts so much overhead on insurance and really gives it the bad name that insurance has. So we immediately set out to find a way to either minimize that process or get rid of it entirely. And the parametric model, we can dive into that later, but it does that. And so that was the basis for our company. And Parametrix sounds so much cooler than parametric.
Yeah, agreed. What is, when you say it's overhead, what's the overhead? What do you refer to when you think of that?
The claims process itself, having to file a claim, having to prove not only your loss, but also what happened in the incident itself, going through forensics investigations. And, there's just it can be a really long process. It can be months or even years, depending on the size of the company and the size of the loss. And there's a lot of legal fees associated with that, and just a lot of overhead in general for companies, and for people as well, if we're just talking about the claims process, the regular claims process that insurance has.
Yeah, I imagine it must vary tremendously, whether it's like a car crash or something simple versus like a power outage that causes business loss. Parametrics is pretty much focused on that. Is that right? So you would typically only insure, is it companies that have cloud storage, and specifically for downtime or network crashes and that kind of thing?
So we insure downtime. So we've created downtime insurance. So when the cloud or cloud applications go down, that's a risk that today you can insure against. We're the first of our kind to be able to protect against this risk. And that's important today because for enterprises, cloud is the either second or third largest expense. And the size of that risk is only growing, right? Things are moving more into the cloud, less on premise. And there are more and more different cloud applications that a business relies on.
Interesting. So what's when an enterprise thinks about the risk of downtime, do they think about it in terms of revenue lost or advertising revenue or transactions lost? Like in their minds, what's the cost of downtime?
So each business will think of it differently. It can be direct revenue loss depending on the type of business. So it can be direct revenue loss. It can be recovery expenses, might take time to bounce back up and get back to business. It could be SLA liabilities and liability that you have towards your own customers. If you go down below a certain percentage of nines, usually, 99.9% availability, there's usually liability tied to that. It could be either direct payouts or some sort of, other type of fee, or even it could be credibility or brand recognition that, was impacted due to the outage and the downtime. And you have angry customers that, you have to really take care of well. So they know that you care and this isn't something that's going to, continue happening.
Yeah. Interesting. And did you get a unique vantage point at this problem prior to starting the business, where you saw either were you on the recipient end or the cloud server end? Like where was your viewpoint into this problem to jump into it?
Yes, definitely. That's really where it started from. Both myself and my co-founders have experienced downtime in previous companies that we've worked at. And there was really never a good solution, especially when it came to third-party downtime, right? So cloud or CDN or any type of service cloud application that isn't your own software going down. And when it came to that, it was just a matter of waiting it out, and everyone was kind of on their toes in the meantime. So it was absolutely something that we've all felt, and the pain, and there really was no financial solution until now.
Mm. And does it makes sense to have one, right? Well, I'm thinking about how do you know what the curve looks like on over time, the downtime averages? Like I remember when Twitter was really young, it would crash all the time. It felt like there was this flip of the coin. Now I can't remember the last time Twitter was down, and I think that's probably true of just about every other site. Is it converging on 99.999 where it's like, effectively it'll be negligible in a few years, or how do you understand the landscape of downtime over time?
So I'd say definitely the older and larger you are as a company, the more resources you have to try and mitigate downtime from a technical perspective. So technically, yes, there is a possibility that we will see downtime less and less for these companies, but there are so many new companies popping up that actually outweighs the large companies that are able to mitigate their own time. So I'd say it's not a problem that's going away anytime soon. Cloud is accelerating, triple digit rates, and really it's not going away anytime soon. And the biggest reason for downtime, because we do track this and we do look at a lot of different data points, the biggest reason for these huge outages is almost always human related. So as long as you still have humans that are in charge of the cloud, it's not going away anytime soon.
So what are people doing back there? They have like wrenches and bolts and soldering irons, and they're just tinkering away at the server farms? Or like, what would a is it a sysadmins? Mice gets in there.
We've seen outages that were due to something pretty similar to that. But I'd say the majority are a bit more boring than that. It's either a bad, deployment or a bad release, or just a surge of traffic that wasn't tested during development and acts differently than what they were expecting.
Mm. And does it vary tremendously between the different providers, like between AWS and Azure and everyone else?
It does vary. So really that's where we come into play. So the only way we were able to ensure this, the way that we're ensuring it with the parametric model that eliminates the claims process, and in general to just price this risk, was that we had to monitor all of the services that we provide coverage for. So for example, if we take the cloud, we're monitoring AWS in all of their regions and all of their zones across all of their top mission critical services. Same for Google, same for Microsoft Azure, same for all other cloud and cloud applications that we insure. And so we're collecting data as we're monitoring, we're detecting downtime, even, the shortest 5-minute outages we detect, and we're continuously collecting this data. And we are seeing differences in, the outages that these clouds and regions have. I wouldn't say that one is necessarily more prone to downtime than others, but I'd say certain regions in these clouds or certain services in these clouds are more prone to downtime than their alternative in a different cloud.
Interesting. Is there anything to understand there? Is it like due to electricity availability in countries, or is there some difference between different areas why they would be different downtime outages?
So the big public clouds all use tier 3 and up data centers, meaning that they all have, backup to backup to backup, both for power outages and, hardware. And essentially for the basic stuff, they aren't supposed to have downtime, and they wouldn't place the tier 3 data center in a place where they couldn't provide that level of power or electricity. So it's usually not due to that. I will say that newer regions or newer services, anything new, tends to have a bit more outages than one that is tried and true and tested. And so, but I'd say that's to be expected. But there are also things that you don't expect, right? There are certain regions that have been around for a while and still have a good amount of outages. So it's definitely something, I think, not only from an insurance point of view, but I think just from a technology point of view, that's really interesting for the tech team or for any business really to investigate and look into before choosing where to set up their infrastructure.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you say downtime, when people say downtime, is it percentage of all time in the year? So if you say you have a 99.2% uptime, or I guess you'd say it that way, then that means that out of all the time in a year, on average, for the last few years, you've been down, 0.08% of the time. Is that the right way to think about it?
So it really depends what you're measuring. Usually it's a percentage so that it works for almost any interval of time. And generally it's looked at either monthly or annually. But the percentage can be used almost, in any interval of time. The clouds themselves, so we look at it at any interval of time, because for us, even a 30-minute outage can be detrimental for a business, especially, depending what type of business it is. If it's a business that focuses their biggest day of the year around the Super Bowl, a 20-hour outage any other day of the week is not as big a deal as a 10-hour outage during the Super Bowl. So we'll look at it from the business perspective and structure our coverages around that. But the way that the clouds look at it is they will usually look at it monthly, and they'll look at it's called a service. Their service level agreements for their availability per different services. So each service will have a different level of availability, and if it falls below that, you're able to ask for credits back. So you're not actually getting compensation for your business loss. You're getting compensation for, the cloud spend or whatever your subscription costs to the cloud, and you didn't receive service for a certain period of time during that month. So it's not really looked at, I think, from the business perspective of what the actual loss was, because the actual loss is so much more than just whatever you spent on the cloud during that time.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So is that true in all cases? So Parametrix wouldn't be reimbursing a company for any business loss. It's just purely the percentage of time that was down out of what they're spending on cloud expenses?
The other way around. So the clouds themselves will give you credits back for
I see.
service you paid them but didn't receive. We cover the actual business loss.
Okay.
And different to other types of traditional insurance coverages where you have to show receipts for the actual dollar amount of loss that you had. In our case, we understand that there are losses that don't necessarily have a receipt, like brand recognition, right? And certain customer compensations that aren't necessarily bound by an SLA agreement, right? We've seen companies give out a free month subscription to customers after an outage, not because they have to, but because they want their customers to stay their customers and not to leave for an alternative. So they're giving them, this free gift. And so for us, those are the types of losses that we look at and that we care to cover, in addition to the ones that do have a receipt.
That sounds challenging in a way. It sounds there's some areas where I'm sure it's vanilla to figure out what the cost is, but then if a company is debating, they call up Parametrix and they say we have a 35-minute downtime and our brand is invaluable, and in their minds they think they're the most valuable brand, and they think that was a huge expense. Is there just kind of that inevitable human perception negotiation that happens, or is there ways that you guys have figured out how to quantify it or put it into a container?
We've definitely figured it out. First of all, I hope that they think that they're valuable, because that means that they're producing a good product, and so
maybe
I really do hope
I don't know if you can go that far.
that they think that. But what we do is we pre-agree on the terms. So we'll pre-agree on how much dollar amount per hour of downtime the company would get in case of an outage, and then the premium is based off of that. So actually everything is pre-agreed, and that was one of the things that when we set out to found Parametrix, and some of the discovery that we had with customers was they said not only is the claims process a pain, but also after going through the claims process, you always get less than what you thought you were going to be getting. And then you feel ripped off because you had this extremely long process and then got less than what you thought you were going to get. So that is another reason why we decided to pre-agree on that ahead of time. You're going to be getting the exact amount that we agreed ahead of time. There's no like hidden fees or anything like that. That's what you're going to be getting. And there's no claims process. So what we'll do is we monitor the cloud. We know exactly when it goes down. We know what cloud you're sitting on and what services you're using. And then that's really all we need. So when there's an outage, you're definitely impacted, and then that money is transferred.
So is it, from their perspective, the company's perspective, is it just, hey, email in my inbox saying, hey, there was an outage last night for 20 minutes and we deposited money in your account? Or do they have to initiate a claim and have some kind of conversation?
It's a combination of both. We'll reach out. They do need to sign that they had a loss, right? It is insurance, and it is traditional insurance that's backed by traditional players in the market. And we can talk about why this is relevant for crypto players in just a minute. But it is they have to sign, hey, I had a loss, and then the rest is just a clean and easy process. Yeah.
It seems like, Neta, the magic is the scanning of the cloud. Like that's the piece. Like conceptually, it's nice. I mean, the concept of reimbursing people or insuring people for downtime is great, but it would be impossible, or nearly impossible, if you had to rely on the company's self-reporting. You have these, you can detect even 5-minute downtimes. How is that technically working? Is it a bunch of web crawlers hitting all these sites every 5 minutes, or do you have embedded code on the sites of your customers, or something else?
So we don't sit on our customers at all. We actually prefer not to. What we'll do is we will monitor the service providers themselves. So we're monitoring the infrastructure, and we know when the infrastructure goes down, and then the customer that is sitting on that infrastructure is impacted.
Got it. So you just monitor, would it be like monitoring the Amazon Web Services status page to see when that changes?
No, that's when you said you can't just go off by what they say. That's what we look at, right? You can't just go off by what they say, because we're monitoring them and we see that it is quite different. And I think customers will tell you the same, right? There's 5-minute outages aren't reported on that page, for example. The customers generally see a bigger impact than what is reported. So we don't only go off of the status pages. We actually monitor the infrastructure directly, both on the application layer and on the networking layer.
Interesting. So how does that work technically? Is it you're making a request to? It would be a stretch for me to even guess. How are you, from a computer science perspective, monitoring the infrastructure?
So that's really where our IP lies. But what I can tell you is that we're monitoring everything, both the application layer, the networking layer. It's not just pings, it's way deeper than that. Each service is monitored separately, right? There's a difference between monitoring a compute service and a storage service, for example. And so each one is monitored separately and also across all the data centers that the cloud provides.
Interesting. So I'm picturing some kind of computer program that you guys have hosted on these local cloud providers that track when it goes down and then uses the compute that these cloud services offer in those areas to see when that goes down as well. Is that generally speaking? I mean, I'm not, obviously I don't want to.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, we produce a ton of data. So we have over 700 million data points a week just from this system. And this system is also hosted in multiple clouds because we are a cloud-based company, but we're monitoring cloud outages, right? So we essentially can't go down when the cloud goes down. And so we've really set it up across multiple clouds and multiple data centers and are monitoring down to the millisecond how they're performing.
So would this make sense by example? So if you have a cloud service provider in, say, Italy, and you want to measure the downtime of that location, that you'd have some program running in the cloud on that location. And then when it goes down, then it's not communicating with the other cloud programs that you have running on other cloud providers. So it says, hey, the Italy cloud is down. It's not responsive. Therefore, we're tracking that time. And then once it pops back on, then we say, hey, it's back. So then you measure that as an outage. Does that rough analogy hold true?
It's yes, but it's very rough. So I'd say you're also missing the other way around. So it's, hey, Italy isn't responding anymore. But the other way around is true as well, right? Italy isn't alive. Italy isn't alive, and there's Italy isn't responding. And you also have to look at it from different areas around the world, right? Maybe Italy is disconnected from the US, but maybe Italy is working in Japan, for example. So it's a really widespread mesh of monitoring tools that we've developed, and that's where our IP lies, because this is data that no other provider in the world has. And this is what we base our models on, and this is what we base our triggers on when there are outages. And so there's a lot of neat tech behind it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So if there's a Italy to US communication that's down, but the Italy to the rest of the world is still working, then that would be considered a partial outage, right? Which is that, I guess, depending on whatever, agreement you have with the company, would be partially insured. So there's like a whole, so you have partial outages, full outages, storage outages, compute outages, and you have all these different.
Tons. Those are just two services that the cloud provides. And, the cloud provides tens of, almost hundreds of services, and each one needs to be monitored individually. And then you also have other cloud applications that aren't necessarily the public cloud that are also monitored. For example, content delivery networks, right? CDN, which is how, resources or files and videos get transferred quickly around the world. And when that goes down, then essentially websites stop working are working very slowly.
Can you give me a 8th grader level description of what a CDN is and why it's useful?
Yes, it's the way that you're able to watch a YouTube video in Japan, even if the YouTube video is hosted on a server in the US.
So would it be true that a CDN is frequently, maybe every few minutes or hours or seconds, it's pulling data from other locations and then storing it temporarily? Is that the right way to think about
Yeah,
it?
so it's caching it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
storing it temporarily in closer data centers to where you're physically located, even if the resource itself is, homed somewhere else across the world.
Do you think this rough analogy is true, that the way that the computer works, the way that the mind works, the way that the cloud layer works, all have parallel um, purposes, where you have long-term storage, which is the cloud locations, you have your disk space on your computer, and you have your long-term memory in your brain. Then you have your short-term memory, you have your RAM on your computer, and then you have caching layer on the cloud. Does that metaphor hold true for you? In those examples?
Yeah, I definitely think that we're computers.
Yeah. All
I
right.
have context switches all the time. We're definitely programmed, and I think when we invented the computer, we couldn't think of any other way to do it. And so
There also seems like there's
that's
something. It's not just one of many options of building a computer. It seems like the way that nature has evolved our minds is the way that just works with a lot of data. It just, if you live in a world where there's a lot of things going on and you want to process that, recall that, remember that, then it just makes sense to have these multiple layers. I guess that's just a fundamental truth of how humans, or maybe all life, processes information, because it seems more so than just humans, right? Many different animals have this kind of dual memory system. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. There's something to that. It's like we're building a collective giant brain in the cloud and the caching layer.
When it goes down, that's
Yeah.
that's a problem.
Yeah. So what happens if a giant solar flare comes? Is that just you throw your hands up and you say, well, can't account for this one? Like, obviously you can't predict that, but statistically speaking, something like that might happen. Does that come up in conversations?
Yes. So actually, one of the most interesting things that happens in insurance is that you end up talking about these big black swan events, right? Because they seem like they're, out there and can never happen, but statistically they can, right? Who would have thought that a pandemic would have happened in this year? Well, insurance thought about it, right? And there were actually risk managers that were talking about it, and everyone probably thought they were crazy. So there's definitely, but those are factored into the models, right? So you look at black swan events as something that potentially can happen, and you factor those in. But trust me, if we have a solar flare, I think we have bigger problems. Than just than just Amazon going down. I think there's going to be other things that we're going to be wrapping our brains around.
How likely is that? Is that something that you lose any sleep over? Do you think, having looked into it, is like what do you like chances of it happening in our lifetime? I'm 34. If I live to be 84 of the next 50 years, is it like, are we looking at like a 0.00000, or
these can be, so I can't speak to the solar flare specifically. I can look that up in the models. It's definitely in there. But I don't remember that off the top of my head. But when we talk about black swan events, we talk about, one in at least 200 years. So one in 200, 1,000 years type of event. If that falls within your lifespan, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. You ever watch the second Blade Runner, the movie?
No.
Oh, it's really good. You should definitely watch it. There's a part in there where he goes, there's a giant, in the past, there's a giant solar flare, or I don't think they refer to exact cause of it, but it's a complete outage, and they reviewed as the blackout. So all disk space was scrambled. Basically anything that was operating on a computer was lost. And it's fascinating to see that portrayed in theatrical perspective, because it's something that if it were to happen today, I mean, how much of your life is stored on a computer versus written down somewhere? And it wouldn't be the first time that that's happened to human collection of knowledge, right? With Alexandria, Library of Alexandria burning down. It's like, I don't know. I think about that sometimes and think about what ways we would prevent that. I don't know if Google has it'd be nice if Google had like a printed version of all their, or at least a majority of the Wikipedia pages printed out somewhere in a giant vault.
You don't have to wait until, that big of an event. What do you think about cold storage wallets?
Yeah, with crypto specifically?
Yeah, for someone that's a big incident, right? If that disappears or you lose it, that can be a really big deal. It doesn't have to be something that is across the entire globe. These are incidents that can happen on the same magnitude, but for an individual, right? A house burning down, and childhood photos being lost, things of that sort. It can, happen on a smaller scale as well.
Yeah, it sure can. In crypto, you mentioned crypto earlier. Is Parametrix focused on crypto specifically, or is there a part of the business in the future that will be?
Oh, we definitely are. We actually have seen that we have many customers from the crypto space. So both it can be exchanges, wallets that aren't cold, that have some connection to the cloud, crypto platforms, and digital asset platforms. We've definitely seen how they're connected to the cloud, and especially in the crypto space, it's one of those industries that doesn't have a lot of patience for downtime, right? Customers want everything to be available all the time, and they expect it to be available all the time. And if there's downtime due to the cloud, that doesn't matter, right? You should have had better redundancy, better resiliency, and then it's a matter of how do you mitigate this risk of losing customers now because they're unhappy with the service that they didn't receive from you during the outage.
Yeah, have you seen a majority of companies come in through crypto, or does the customer list of your company tend to look more like? I'm just thinking, who would be most interested in this? Is it larger companies that have really important systems like airlines or banks or that kind of thing, or is it more consumer or money fintech companies?
In general, or in the crypto space?
Oh, I was curious in general.
Okay. In general, it's usually bigger companies are less interested in taking risks, and therefore they try to mitigate as many risks as they can. Also, usually the bigger the company, the more competitors they potentially have, and if they aren't providing the service to their fullest, customers will leave. And so we do see it, I'd say, in like mid to large size companies. We have both private and public companies. There definitely is a big need also for small companies, right? It just depends on the type of business, and the coverage is suitable for anyone using the cloud. So all companies basically.
Yeah. Do you think that it'll grow to the point where every company has this and thinks of it as kind of table stakes to start? I imagine startups probably just never would. There's just not enough incentive, I guess, for the percentage of downtime realistically that they'd be looking at. Is that right?
Plenty of startups as customers. No, it's really whoever's in the cloud should be getting this, and it is one of those things that we see as being a staple in an insurance portfolio. And that's due to the fact that the cloud is the second or largest, expense that a business has, right? You're not going to be spending millions of dollars on the cloud and not insuring that, while you are insuring, the furniture in your company or in your building, which it costs a lot less than that, right? So it's definitely something that is part of the risk that we're taking as businesses when we move to the cloud, where downtime now is not within our control necessarily. And so there
Yeah.
needs to be a certain level of risk mitigation.
Yeah, that's true. I can vibe with that. I remember when we raised money, we raised our Series B. We had about 50 employees. I was amazed at how much insurance we had to get. It felt like, this is probably very typical of every company that size, but it's like everything's insured. It's just you look. I'm like like you said, all the furniture, all the people, all the actions of the people, all the electronics for so many different instances. But it makes sense. I mean, as you accumulate more personally, and then as a company, you think about these things.
Yeah, as a company, you have responsibility, right? You have responsibility over the people you employ. You have responsibility over your customers. You have responsibility, and part of that is, being able to financially support them if something goes wrong. And so, yeah, as a company, it's one of those things that you have to get, and it's one of those things that you don't want to think about until yeah, you just want to know that you have it, right?
Yeah.
You want to know that you're covered. You want to know that you're protected, and then you don't want to think about it that much more.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the cloud again. So when you think about the cloud, when I think about the cloud, I think of these large data centers. We've all seen the little snippet videos where it's like row after row after row of these huge servers in ultra clean rooms with massive fans. And these would be owned and monitored by Google or Amazon or Microsoft. Generally speaking, there's a few really large providers of cloud services, and they benefit from economies of scale. And so it makes sense that there's a few really big ones out there, and they have them distributed all across the world. So there's kind of this consolidation effect of cloud service providers, where similar actually in crypto, funny enough, where we say crypto is entirely decentralized, but the mining itself has been hyper consolidated. So it's like if I'm sending you Bitcoin or vice versa, that's happening on one of 12 different mining company server farms. Yeah. And do you see it, like if you kind of map this out over time, we have local storage of servers, we have distributed servers all over the place. That gets really consolidated amongst a few players. Does it just end there? I mean, do you see 50 years from now, we're just in the same arrangement where we have these large server farms across the planet? Do you see them shooting these things up into space and having computational and storage power floating around in orbit? Does that make sense, or some other trajectory?
Yeah, so definitely, I think, one of the things that, and you spoke about this a little bit before, that, we're as humans going to be focused on is just preserving the amounts of data that we have. And so, shooting it into the sky, putting it in the Arctic, all those types of things are one way to go. So I think there are going to be some pretty cool experiments with that. Some of them, may take form for the future, and some of them may make for a very interesting article. But regardless of that, what I see is that, yes, we are seeing consolidation. We are seeing that when these giants, right, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, when they want to grow, and they have to grow because more and more people and companies are moving to the cloud, when they grow, they essentially consume other smaller providers, right? So if they are to open a data center in a country where they don't have a data center yet, usually what they'll do is they'll acquire a very small local cloud provider, and then they'll just ramp up the data center so that it becomes a tier 3 and up data center, which is their standard. And so I think that is something that we're going to continue seeing. It's going to be very hard for a small player to compete with these big players. But, it is an open market. So essentially there may be new technology that comes out that, can be decentralized in some way, shape, or form. And it's open market.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw a stat recently that was, I think there's I think there's roughly 9 billion people on the planet, somewhere in that range, 8 to 9, and that roughly 60% have access to the internet today. And of those, 90% were on mobile. So there's roughly 4 to 4.5 billion people who still don't have internet, which kind of blows my mind when I travel around and see different. I mean, when you travel, it's biased that you're traveling to cities with airports, and then those are going to be likely more developed. But there's a huge number of people in rural areas that don't have internet. That seems like it's changing quickly. It seems like the rate at which countries that are typically had been previously impoverished, lack of infrastructure, namely roads, buildings, sophisticated and not corrupt government, and then internet infrastructure, seems like that's increasing dramatically just about everywhere in the world. Do you see that being the driving force for cloud growth, or is it more so, are companies still operating dedicated servers, or is that pretty much on its way out, or, you know, very, very small?
It's on its way out, but they still are, right? So there's a pretty good chunk of companies that are planning to moving to the cloud or have partially moved to the cloud, but they definitely still have on-premise servers. And some of those are big, right? We're talking big banks.
Okay.
And so I definitely, when those move to the cloud, the cloud market will grow even more than it's growing now. You know, the population that isn't connected necessarily to the internet today will continue to be connected, right? So you could see growth from there, but I think it's going to be the big fish moving to the cloud that is really going to make an impact, and it's just continuing the trajectory that it's already going through right now, right? And cloud consumption is astronomical.
Yeah. Do you have an idea? Would you say 10% of all, how would you think about this? Like 10% of all current computation and storage is today being done on individual servers versus the cloud? Does that sound right? Or is it more like 0.1 or 30%? Like how many, I think of these banks and I can't think of, I mean, are they really consuming a ton of traffic and computation?
Yeah, they have a ton of, first of all, well, traffic, yes, and data as well is one of those things that they're consuming. There's definitely a lot of movement happening. You know, every transaction, things like that, where it can even be in, you know, the small things that we don't think about, but it definitely adds up. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious to ask you about Tel Aviv. So you're in Israel. You've been there for a while, but you also lived in the U.S. I've interviewed a number of people from Tel Aviv in particular, and I'm struck by how innovative and how many awesome companies and intelligent people come out of or live in Israel, in Tel Aviv in particular. The one thing that somebody told me, that a guest I interviewed, a founder, was like, he said to me that in Israel, the military or service is compulsory. Everyone volunteers. I don't know if you call it volunteers, but everyone's a part of it at some point in their life. There is a war, active high tension. I don't know if you call it a war, but there's like active tensions going on. So there's this mentality that people have where they're thinking about how to progress technology. How do we, because, in today's world, physical confrontation among countries is a technology game. It has been for a long time, but more so software, more so sophisticated arms battles and that sort of thing. And he's like, we're thinking about this all the time. So you get into this situation of you're in the war room and you have to design an anti-defense missile system. And so you're put into this arrangement of complex system and software and real world design that in many ways is training grounds for building a company. And he's like, because so many people have that mental operation or that experience is so pervasive, it's like you come out of that and you're like, well, what am I going to do? Let's go start a company. You're already kind of trained on that way of thinking. Does that vibe with you? Do you see that among other friends of yours and people you meet, that that's the influence? Or is there something else about Tel Aviv or Israel that gives it the spark?
I don't know, but I can definitely tell you that a startup is not like the military. Completely different. I don't know if that is the best training ground for a startup. Maybe more for a corporate. But maybe on the technology front, there is some truth in that. So there is a lot of thinking around innovation and technology, and I think people feed off each other. So if that's the conversation that people are having at a bar, or if that's the conversation that just people are having at a coffee shop, then you pull inspiration from that. And so I definitely think that it's people feeding off of one another. And yeah, I don't know, I can't tell you why, but there definitely are a lot of startups.
Yeah, I mean, my family's from Italy. When I go there, they're all kind of quintessentially just laying back and eating food. Like there's no urgency to the effort. And I feel like given the geopolitics, it seems like there's an urgency to the development of building things and moving things forward. Interesting perspective. I'm curious, your background is, having been on the technical side, you're the CTO. What languages is the company built on now, or what technologies? And then what technologies do you stay up on or are most excited? Or are there things that come to mind when you think about technology advancement?
Yeah. So I think one of the best things about being a part of a startup and founding a startup is that you get to choose which technologies you work with, and it's not some legacy system that is very hard to move and to innovate from. And so our technology stack is the latest, and it's always fun to work with new technology, and every new project that we set out. Those are some of the things that we look into. And I think really what we focus on is the cloud, and not only how quickly it's evolving, but the risks that come with everyone moving to the cloud, and how technology can help to mitigate that risk, both in understanding the risk, defining downtime, understanding how often downtime happens, alerting quickly when it does happen. All of these things are things that we look at, and things that I think from a technology perspective are where the world is moving and going as more and more companies move to the cloud. Another thing I think that we look at, which is definitely a huge focus, is availability. I think we as humans are becoming less patient, and we think we need things to be always on and always available, and we have zero patience and tolerance for downtime. And also, if something happens that impacts the standard that we expect to see, we expect a certain compensation, or at least a different treatment than just, oh, sorry, we messed up. And so that's another thing that we're seeing with technology as things move fast and quickly, and there's a lot of new technologies popping around. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in the crypto space specifically is really credibility. And that's one of those things that, in new spaces, new tech, new innovation, credibility is really important to create, not only in the technology itself, by either having it open sourced, or, just explaining into how it works and what you're doing. Credibility is really one of those things that we see companies look at, especially when they evaluate our insurance, which is actually quite interesting, right? Because crypto is such a new and innovative space, but is turning to the traditional insurance industry because, having that stamp of approval from a traditional insurer that has vetted your company and is willing to insure your risk is something that builds credibility and trust. And we've seen a lot of crypto companies talk about insurance on their websites, and it's something that doesn't happen necessarily in other industries.
Yeah. Okay. What can I ask you? What technology stack do you use today, and how did you choose it?
Yeah, so we're based in the cloud, right? So AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. We have multi-cloud infrastructure. We write mainly in Python and Rust, depending on how low level we need to go. Everything is run on Kubernetes. That's really important for us to be top of game there, especially since we're across multiple clouds.
What can I ask
database
you on Kubernetes? What is Kubernetes, and why is it important that you use it?
So Kubernetes is a way to orchestrate your infrastructure, right? So it's important to use it because today you want a well-orchestrated infrastructure, and you want to know exactly when things are running and why, and when they're not, you want them to automatically bounce back.
And is Kubernetes built? Is it an open source? Would you describe it as an open source architecture, or an open source programming language, or a product built from Docker? You tell me.
So it is open source, but it has managed services, right? So each cloud will let you use a managed Kubernetes service, which is usually easier to get up and running, but you can host it yourself if you want to.
And do you think of Kubernetes as containers, so that you're running code inside of a Kubernetes container? Is that the right way to think about it? Or
they come together. So Kubernetes is a container orchestration, so it runs containers, but it isn't a container itself.
I see. Got it. All right. So you use Kubernetes on the cloud, Python, Rust. What was it about Rust that you decided to use? I typically think of Rust as more used in crypto. I hear it a lot. Yeah. What's the, was it just familiarity with the language in the early days, or was there other attributes that made it appealing?
No. So we decided to go for Rust because we were looking for a lower level language. So we have things that monitor the networking layers of the cloud infrastructure, and that was a lot more efficient to do with a lower level language.
Where did you learn computer science? Did you learn it? Did you learn most of it in school, traditional higher education, or did you learn most of it just hacking on side projects, or from a mentor, or something?
Self-taught, pretty much. Yeah, self-taught. I actually started working before I got my degree, so I kind of did things the other way around. But yeah, it's always just been a passion.
What'd you do? Did you build a personal website like netarozy.com and figure out all the hosting and domain registrar and front end, back end? Or were you working on another startups, or how did you get into it?
Not necessarily building a website, but I think every time there was a problem I had in my life, I looked to solve it with technology. And so just a bunch of side projects, gaming, things like that were always an interest. And I think a lot of developers start from that as well. Looking for like codes and things like that where you can get more points.
Yeah.
It's always a good place to start. But yeah, I think, that's usually how most people start, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked to some people who they'll recognize that we're going through a huge global explosion in the need for the number of developers. Certainly they're paid well. There's a lot of perks to the job. You can do it anywhere. You can solve your own problems. How do you think of the process of, if you're talking to yourself 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever you're really deciding whether this is something you want to pursue professionally, how do you think about the questions you'd ask yourself then? speaking to someone else who's younger, if they're coming to you and they say, "Hey, Neta, I want to be a software developer because they earn a lot of money and they can travel," and meanwhile you look at this person and it's like, I don't know if this is quite for you. What do you ask them, or how do you coach or think about guiding someone to make that decision?
So I think there almost isn't a wrong answer as to why why become a software engineer, even if it is, seem that even if your answer is it seems like a great career, ideally you will have some interest in it, right? And you want to enjoy waking up in the morning. But I do think it is the base for almost anything. So even if you don't see yourself as a developer 10 years from now, I do think that the way that our world is structured today is all around technology. So having that base is good for anything, no matter what you're going to be doing, right? If you're marketing, then maybe you're working at a tech company, and that base will come in handy. If it's sales, maybe you're selling a tech product, and that base will come in handy. And so I almost don't think there's a wrong answer as to why pursue software development. Ideally, you're also interested in it and you do see yourself a developer in 10 years.
Yeah. That's a good way to think about it. And if you're not interested in it, even if you learn the basics, then you'll be frustrated long enough where you say, this is not for me, but you still keep the experience points that you gained even in the early days, whether it's a few months or a few years in trying it out. It does seem like a good piece of advice I got when I was younger was go after something that's more technical. And if you don't like it, change, as opposed to the other way around. So I studied mechanical engineering, computer science, and it was helpful to start off in that direction. So I think that's who knows, because the world changes and the demand for different skills change over time. But if you're today, right now, it seems like good advice. And you guys are located only in Israel? Is it a remote team? Is there anything that you guys are looking for or that you want to throw out there? Certainly, I'm sure if companies are interested in getting cloud insurance, check out parametricsinsurance.com, I believe. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're not only based out of Tel Aviv. Actually, our headquarters are in New York. So we have a New York office. The development and the research and development teams sit in Tel Aviv, which is why I'm out here. But actually, the headquarters are in New York, and we are a global company. So we sell all across the U.S., all across Europe, and Japan, and growing to more and more locations very, very soon. We have employees all over the world, so remote work is definitely an option at Parametrix. We're always looking for amazing people, so either hiring, so we're always looking to grow both the development teams and all the other teams in the company, and really looking for great people mainly. And partners, right? So great partners for the way is something that, we're always interested in. So if, anyone has any interests, reach out. Always here to help out in whatever way I can.
Yeah. It sounds like if for nothing else, people would learn a lot about how you built what you built. It sounds like a really innovative approach to insurance, and I'm sure you'll have other ideas that spin off new products in the future. So congrats on everything you guys have built. Are you publicly writing or tweeting or blogging anywhere that you want to throw out for your own, or no?
I probably should be. I'd say I'm most active on LinkedIn, although I should probably be more active on Twitter, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, yesterday, Elon bought Twitter, so maybe that'll change.
Yeah, I know, right? So who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually good that I'm not on.
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't believe that deal went through as fast as it did.
Right. It was just rumors.
I know. And they're like, well, it's done. Yeah. Crazy times.
That means it's probably been done weeks before too, right? And
yeah.
they were waiting for the PR moment.
He seems so damn transparent though. It's like everything he tweets out, he's like, yeah, he put up a poll on Twitter. He's like, should I sell my shares of Tesla? And they voted yes. So he sold them. And then they're like, what do you think of, is Twitter an open and free platform for communication? And it was like 80% of people said no. So he's like, all right, I'm going to buy it. It's just,
Fix that, right?
yeah, let me fix that. Open source it and whatever else. Cool.
That would be great.
Yeah. I think so, but who knows? Either way, it'll be a twist to the story of the human journey. Who knows? Whatever repercussions happen there. All right, Neta, I'll let you run. It's so great to talk to you and so great to meet you, and keep crushing it.
It was great meeting you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.